Hello and welcome to the confines of Wynns Hotel here in central Dublin for the latest episode of Coffee at Wynns. My guest today is Brendan O'Neill, ex of the Irish Guards. Brendan spent 24 years in the Irish Guards from 1990 to 2014, retiring at the rank of Lance Sergeant. Brendan, you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Brendan, before we start to talk about yourself, let's talk about the Irish Guards. Who are the Irish Guards?
The Irish Guards are a regiment of the Household Division in the British Army. We are one of 7 in the Household Division. The motto of the Household Division being Qui Septem in Uno, 7 into 1. The first regiment would be the Grenadier Guards, then the Coldstream Guards, then the Scots Guards, then the Irish Guards, and then the Welsh Guards. And then after that, in the Household Cavalry, we have the Blues and Royals.
Brendan, a little bit about the Irish Guards. It was founded in 1900 by order of Queen Victoria at the time for the bravery of Irishmen serving in the British Army in the Boer War in South Africa. And I think that it has a very long and stellar history. There was 2 regiments served at least 2 regiments served in the First World War, and then in every major conflict that Great Britain has been involved in since. Can I just ask you about yourself, Brendan? You're originally from whereabouts in Dublin?
Originally from Dublin, south of Dublin, in the suburbs, and I joined the Irish Guards back in 1990. Before that, I had a background in the military. I was in the Reserve Defence Forces for 9 years. People might have known it then as the FCA. It's now not known as the RCA, the Reserve Defence Force, RDA. During that time, I left school in 82. Between 82 and 90, I was originally an apprentice electrician for 4 years. And then, as you might know, or people might know, there was a downward turn in the economy in the 80s. Wasn't much work in the country. Very depressing place to live in and hard to get a job. So with my background in the Reserve Defence Forces, I made contacts with those who had served in the Irish Guards. So I made inroads into contacting the Irish Guards about joining. And after a 6-month preliminary investigation into my background, I then joined and built up my fitness to join as a recruit.
And did you give any consideration to joining the Irish Army at the time?
I did as well, yes. I put my name down every year in Bricken's Hospital in Arbour Hill to join the Permanent Defence Forces, but the Permanent Defence Forces even then weren't taken on, or as I thought then, it was a bit of a closed shop where relatives of those already serving got in prior to those that hadn't served before. So I got a bit disheartened about not getting picked to join the Permanent Defence Forces, so then I looked elsewhere.
And what was the reception when you joined the Irish Guards?
Very good. Initially, like anything, it's a step into the unknown about the training and all that, but it's built up gradually, your training over 6 months, and then you become a fully trained soldier, and you have a passing out parade after that, and then you join the regiment, as it were, from your training depot.
And how Irish is the Irish Guards?
Very much so. Joining the Irish Guards, about, I would say, a fifth came from the Republic of Ireland, maybe about a quarter came from the north of Ireland, and the rest were from other areas in Britain like Liverpool, Manchester, London, and the northeast, where there's Irish background.
So you said that most people who were in the Irish Guards were of either Irish born or of Irish background?
Yes, I'd say first, second, third generation outside of Ireland. Yes.
Yeah. And you had a reputation, or still have a reputation, as being an elite regiment within the British Army. You mentioned, you're talking about the Home Guards, I think you were talking about. Tell us a little bit about where the Irish Guards fit into that sort of as an elite regiment.
Well, we have a dual role. We have a ceremonial role, and we also have what we would call a fighting role. So our ceremonial role is where our public image comes from. So that would be guarding the palaces in London, Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, the Tower of London, and Windsor Castle. Other ceremonial duties would be the state opening of Parliament, the trooping of the colour, and presidential guards of honours for people visiting Britain.
So if you go to Buckingham Palace every day, you'll see people outside looking at the trooping the colour, looking at
the changing of the guard.
Changing of the guard. You've done that more than once or twice.
Indeed, yes.
And what kind of an experience is that?
Your training is all built up to that for your ceremonial stint. Your ceremonial stint could be for 1 year or 2 years, depending where you're based in the London district area. So all your training would be built up to that. So you'd be standing in a sentry box for 2 hours on, 4 hours off. The ceremonial part of the changing of the guard as well is in the public eye, so your drill has to be immaculate at all times and your turnout.
You said to me before we came on camera here that you've also been on sentry duty at Buckingham
Yes.
Palace. I often, because I used to live around there, I'd look at the guys and say, how do you do that? How do you just stand still for as many hours as you did? How do you do that?
It's all about your training and your pride in what you're doing, that you wouldn't flinch, and that your professionalism for those 2 hours that you're on sentry duty would be immaculate.
And would you, do people ever try to put you off and shout things?
Oh, indeed, yes. I mean, I've been on guard in St James's Palace, where you're out on the footpath facing the Mall. Now, you do have policemen watching you and guarding you in case nobody's allowed to touch you, you see. If somebody touches your person, it's like they're touching the whole respect of the Queen and the royal family. So they're not allowed to touch you. You would come to attention, and you would port arms, and you would tell them to stand back. You would take a pace forward and tell them to stand back.
It's a very interesting part of the whole. It's hard to imagine London without
Yes.
the sort of paraphernalia of all of that. And not a lot of people, I
Yes.
suspect, until they saw the Jubilee celebrations this year, realised that the Irish Guards were involved in this, that those guys in the red tunics and the bear skin hats are often Irish.
Indeed.
And obviously, so you have that ceremonial role, which is also the serious business of being a fighting regiment in the British Army. How many men at any given time are in the Irish Guards?
It depends. It fluctuates. I think the full complement would be in around 580 to 600. Now, we would have 5 companies normally in a regiment, and each company, depending on the role, could be anywhere between 60 and 100 in each company.
Okay. And you get deployed overseas, obviously. So where was your first deployment overseas?
I joined the regiment in Berlin. It was just after the wall had come down. So I joined the regiment in 1991 in Berlin, and it was a great eye-opener now. It was my first time abroad, other than going to England for my training. So it was a little bit of a cultural experience. I managed to go into the east of Berlin, and it was like going back in a time warp in time, with the cobblestone streets and the old architecture compared to the western part of the city. And I learned a bit of German, and the prices in Berlin at the time were quite cheap, with the Deutschmark as it was then. And it so happened that the Irish 5-pence piece was the same size and weight as a Deutschmark. So a lot of good-witted Irishmen phoned home on the cheap in Berlin phone boxes. So you had to change your phone box every so often. So because when they got emptied, they'd realise that all these Irish coins were in the phone box.
I remember that because I lived in Munich for a period of time. And so you would have had various deployments. Now, your first deployment in combat, would that have been?
In combat, that would have been in Iraq in 2003, and yeah, that was an experience, all right. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. So
well, we built up our training for that, and we first deployed to Kuwait to acclimatise, and then D-Day was 2 days after St. Patrick's Day, I remember, because we had a St. Patrick's Day ceremony. And we had a prayer before battle, and D-Day was the 19th of March, and we crossed the border into Iraq on the 19th.
And I think, if memory serves me right, the British battle plan was to take Basra, is that
That's
right?
correct,
and that, round down the south of the country.
That's correct.
And how did that go for you?
I was based in the logistical part of that myself. I was in the quartermaster's department, I beg your pardon, I was in the company stores at the time, but I was part of the logistical backup for that. And it was scary because we had to be wary of Scud missile attacks. Now, we were informed that the Iraqis at the time had dirty weapons. So every Scud missile attack, you had to dig in and you had to put on a chemical biological warfare suit. And previously you would have to have injections for anti-nerve agents, etc. But anti-biological weapons, against anti-biological weapons, yeah.
Now, we know that a few Irishmen were killed in fighting with the British Army in Iraq, including Ian Malone.
Yes.
Who was, I think, from...
He was from Dublin, from Ballier.
Ballyfermot. He was a friend of yours?
He was, yes. A good chess player, a good friend. He was a piper. Yes, very sad. A good friend of mine. He was my company quartermaster sergeant who was in my team. He, a fellow Dub, informed me when he got shot by a sniper, himself and Piper Mazuru. I remember the day very vividly. It was a shock and very sad.
And was there many Irish Guards killed in Iraq? Did you know of?
Those were the two at the time, and it was tough. Others were injured during that initial invasion into Iraq, and it was a short tour for us because once it was completed very quickly, because the Iraqis obviously gave up quite quickly compared to the first Gulf War, and we were then replaced by another unit that took over for 6 months. 6 months is usually your tour of duty in any combat zone, but ours was a shortened one. Because we took part in the initial invasion.
And you're obviously aware at the time that the Iraq War was massively controversial. I suppose that's nothing, you would not have considered that going into the...
No, your main concern is for yourself and your comrades, and it's all down to your training. You don't think about politics. It's a fraternal unit you're in, and politics has nothing to do with it. Everything is about guarding your buddy's back and looking for him to guard your back.
When you were there, you were in Basra, etc. Did you think that at the time that Britain was doing the right thing, or I mean, maybe you didn't think about it then, but do you think about it now?
In retrospect, of course, you would think about things like that, but my opinions would be personal on that, and in hindsight, like everybody else, you remember the good things and the people that you knew then. The politics and all, history has a great way of remembering things in different respects through time. So yes.
Well, I guess isn't the old saying, yours is not to reason why, yours is to do and die, and I suppose that's the same for soldiers nowadays as it was.
Oh yes, soldiers will always look after each other, and they will remember through generations. They will remember the camaraderie. Even when they've left the army, they've never left the regiment as such.
And you had
Memories are always there.
you had a second tour 4 years. Is that right? 4 years later.
Yes, there was a continual presence in Iraq, a turnover of every 6 months. So I was posted in Germany at the time, so I missed. There was another tour in 2005. I missed that, but in 2008 I managed to go on another 6 months tour. It ended up being 7 months in the end, I think. But yeah.
And what was that like?
That was a different experience. Now, we were guarding the airport at the time, and we were getting shelled by insurgents, mortared as it were, constantly. But we had a protective umbrella trying to bring down these mortars before they actually landed. But some of them did land, and there were casualties.
Was there any stage in either of your tours that you feared for your life?
Oh yes, yes. You always have to be aware that in any given situation, your life is always in danger.
Yeah, but was there any particular time when you thought this is it, or is it just a general sort of low grade kind of feeling?
Not really. I was on a patrol one time in Basra. I wouldn't forget it. It was a clear night, a full moon, quite surreal. Our patrol got hit up upon. We took fire. We returned fire, and that was it. The rounds were bouncing off the pavement and that near you, but your training comes in and you just remember things in retrospect, things like that. But yeah.
One of the things I found, I've been in the presence of machine guns and is how loud they are. I just don't know how anybody can stand it. I mean, they just go through you, you know. How do you find, how's that, I guess you're just used to it, I suppose.
Indeed, yes. Well, you get used to your weapon that you're going to be using throughout your tour. You're constantly on the firing range, practicing. So yes, you're well used to your weapon and its capabilities, yes. And sound.
What's your feelings for the lad on the other side, the Iraqi, or I know you had been serving Afghanistan, whatever?
There would be no feeling as such. Your enemy is always a target. It's like a paper target on the range. So your enemy is always a target and nothing else at the time. You cannot overthink things like that because you have to protect your friends, or your comrades rather, and yourself. So you have to return fire when needed, and the enemy is always a target, and you wouldn't think them of at the time as a person.
Okay, so just coming back to closer to home, so to speak, about the Irish Guards. I mean, your regiment has a close association with the royal family. As I say, you were founded by Queen Victoria. I think the Queen Mother was your Colonel-in-Chief, is that right, at one stage?
At one stage, yes.
She used to come every St. Patrick's Day, did she not, to the barracks to give you shamrock?
That's right. She visited us while we were in Germany, and anywhere around the world where we were. She would always endeavour to come and visit us and give us shamrock.
And she was replaced, I think, by Prince William, isn't that right? Who's the
Eventually, yes. At one stage, Princess Anne gave us shamrock on St. Patrick's Day, but eventually Prince William became our Colonel-in-Chief and then gave us our shamrock every year.
And he got married in his Irish Guards uniform.
That's
what was
correct,
that all
yes.
about?
Well, he's our Colonel-in-Chief, so it's his right to wear the uniform, and he's an Irish Guardsman.
And I guess he got married, I think, in 2011, if I'm not mistaken,
yes.
in that uniform. And I think a lot of people didn't know that at the time, that he was the Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment. Now, you left in 2014.
That's right.
How would you assess your time in the Irish Guards? Was it a great experience?
Oh, indeed, yes. It was. I made some great friends for life. A lot I'm still in contact with. I'm now the Honorary Secretary of the Irish Guards Association for the Republic of Ireland, so I'm in constant contact with veterans here and also in Britain and the north of Ireland. So yes, we all have our associations and we go to each other's dinners, and we recall the banter of previous
So it's a
life
lifeline.
experiences.
You're always in Irish Guard, so to
Indeed,
speak.
it's a fraternity, yes, and it's ongoing.
And have you ever experienced any grief over serving in the British Army, given the history between Ireland and Britain?
The grief, as in
Did you-
animosity?
yeah,
or-
yeah.
No, and not within the regiment,
Yeah.
and very little outside. Not at home either. A lot of my family and close friends and neighbours all know my history of being in the Irish Guards, and there was no animosity whatsoever. No.
And of course, there's centuries of tradition, is there not? I mean, we're coming just after there was a centenary service for the 6 disbanded regiments from the south of Ireland were disbanded in 1922. The Irish Guards was kept on. So I think people are only discovering the extent to which the Irish have
Yes.
been involved in the British military for hundreds of years.
And it's all happened through the engagement between the Irish government and the British government through the centenary commemorations from 1914-18 war, and us learning ourselves as Irishmen, our history and our background and that. And yes, it's all good. It's nice to have the people remembered that were in Redmond's army, that went to fight for Home Rule in Flanders and came back on. Obviously, we had our War of Independence, we had our Rising, our War of Independence, and later on our Civil War. But we emerged as a nation through all that, and it was all, all good.
We as you know from the you were part of the Queen's Jubilee celebrations, and there was an exchange on the BBC in which Hugh Edwards was asking about the name, the Micks, which you and I know has been the nickname of the Irish Guards for generations, but it was news to him, it was news to a lot of people. People say it's a derogatory term for Irish people and it shouldn't be used. Where do you stand on that?
For the Irish Guards, it's not in no way a derogatory term. It's a fraternal term. We call ourselves the Micks, we call each other the Micks. We're very proud of it. It's a name we hold dearly. And other regiments call us the Micks, and we're proud to be called the Micks. It is in no way derogatory. It's a term of endearment rather than being derogatory at all.
And what did your former colonel mean when he talked about the irrational 10th? He said that the Irish Guards are one of the best regiments in the world, that they embodied the irrational 10th. What does that mean?
I don't understand the question. I don't understand the
I
background
think,
behind it.
well, I think what he meant by the irrational 10th was that military success is 70% tactics and 20% logistics, and then it's 10% the irrational 10th, which is, I suppose, morale, leadership,
Oh,
all
indeed.
that sort of.
Well, we have such a bond in the Irish Guards of brotherhood that, and in our downtime, we work hard, play hard, we enjoy life together from all different traditions. Especially on St. Patrick's Day. They say if we were any more laid back, we'd be horizontal. We're so full of character, I would say. And that's what gives us that special bond compared to other regiments, that bond of friendship and brotherhood that keeps us together in down times.
And do you think there's something very Irish about the Irish Guards in that sense?
Oh, very much so. We have our character, we have that little tint and lint. When we play our regimental march, St. Patrick's Day, we have what's known as the Mick swagger. So when we pull our arms forward, we have a little turn of the wrist, and that makes us special. We have that extra bond with our music and everything else, yes, and our traditions.
Brendan O'Neill, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ronan.